This is Transistor.fm.
Hey, how's it going, product people? It's me, your host, Justin Jackson, and I am here with a brand new series. It's called Mega Profitable. And the idea is I want to look at what makes a product business, a SaaS, software, digital products, whatever you're selling, what differentiates the businesses that are mega profitable from those that are just merely, making the founder a living. And in this week's episode, I talked to Brennan Dunn, who's transitioning from a course-based business with double your freelancing rate to a SaaS called Right Message. But we really delved into what he's done with double your freelancing rate and how he started basically with an ebook that made $2,500 or something like that to a really profitable business. And he reveals numbers in this interview, something that doesn't happen very often. Normally, we only hear about top-line revenue, but we don't hear about what the owner gets to keep in their pocket at the end of the year. And that's what we're delving into here. So if you want to hear more, you need to go to megamaker.co/profit and sign up to get the rest of these case studies. But let's talk to Brennan Dunn right now. Give me a little bit of an update on Right Message. You were really hustling, kind of doing these in-person sales meetings, and you had pretty high commitments. I thought.
So we got 50 customers that way. We put a hold on it to work closely with them. Yeah. While we build out like self sign up and the onboarding and stuff. Yeah. And so that's been going on the product side. On my side, I'm hiring and we're also closing on a funding round. So we're getting some basically $500,000 in seed round stuff. Cool. So it's good for us because it's people we integrate with. Yeah. So, teachable and like they're investing in. So it's strategic money. Yeah. But it's allowing us to we're bringing on like developers, we're bringing on, a customer success person and stuff. So yeah. I mean, it's in terms of interest, our interest list is well over 1,000 now of people who want to sign up. Sweet. So we've got quite the backlog. Yeah. So it's just, I've been more on the kind of like, I was in Atlanta the other day working with a coach who's helping us with scalability. So helping us with growth and management and stuff. So it's unlike anything that I've been involved with before. Yeah. So just making sure all the ducks are in order before we really accelerate the gas on this thing. So,
yeah. And what did you get up to in MRR with those 50?
A little over. Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome, man.
Yeah. So happy about that.
I'm stoked. I love the part I loved was how much you hustled on those sales demos, like just meeting people. And
it's been huge.
Up. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's still it's good and bad in a way because it's bad in that you don't have any other time besides calls. So you're just on calls all day and you can't actually work on the product. Yeah. But the good thing is learned a ton. Really, because I wanted to do that. The mistake I made with PlanScope was I didn't do the one I got this actually from Andrew Culver. Yeah. When he signed me up for Churnbuster years ago, he basically got on Skype with me. He's like, okay, share your screen and we're going to get you set up. Yeah. So he didn't have any onboarding yet. It was all like one-on-one, him seeing where I get stuck, where I get confused and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then, now that I've done that dozens of times, we can now go back to, and actually wireframe out the onboarding and stuff. So, yeah. I'm glad we started with that. And then so now I'm focused on basically the hiring side and working, with everyone else basically on the wireframing and the onboarding. Yeah. And then it's back to, cause I'm still going to do one-on-ones. That wasn't like a short-term one-off thing. Yeah. But it won't be the 40-hour-a-week things anymore. Yeah. It was just insane, but it worked so well. I mean, it was so effective for just intimately understanding what are people using this for? What what persuaded them on the marketing site, and how does the product need to immediately fulfill that? So our goal with self sign up and onboarding is minimizing the gap between, okay, I click sign up on the sign up form and getting the results I need. So I think we're getting there. We're getting there quickly, more quickly than we would have if we would have not done this exercise first. So.
Yeah. And it obviously feels a lot different than PlanScope.
Totally different. Yeah. I mean, one other good thing about it is, unlike PlanScope required people to use it every day or really frequently to make it valuable to them, right?
Yeah.
The beauty of this is it's like you set it up. Yeah, there's some maintenance, but for the most part, it just works on, I mean, it's like, Postmark, right? Or something like that. Yeah. You use Postmark to send transactional emails, but you never log in.
Yeah.
So the good thing is I don't need to worry. The hardest thing with selling PlanScope was getting people to change behavior.
Yeah.
Which I don't think we take into account as much as we should in terms of it's one thing to build software. It's another to actually get people to modify the way they work, to use it in their, how they work, right?
Yeah.
So with this, there's a lot we can do either manually with success people or with onboarding or whatever else. But once they're up and get some beginning success, we just shoot them a weekly email with stats. They don't need to go in daily to make it valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I joke about this all the time that I'm still using Fireworks CS5, even though I've bought Sketch and I could upgrade on Creative Cloud or whatever, but I'm so used to using it, and old habits are really hard to change. But if you called me up and said, with a completely different kind of vector and said, I can install this thing on your website that'll make you 10 times more money and you pay me $100 a month for it, I'd be like, okay, well, that sounds pretty good. It's the outcome I care about. And sometimes the switching behavior is I'm so used to doing things in Fireworks that you're asking me to do a lot of work in the short term to even start using something else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's that switching cost, right? It's not about, okay, this software is better or this is more powerful or whatever. It's about, I'm getting X degree of success with this. What's the delta between if you want me now to get that success in through a different device or different app, right? And I think as creators, we don't think about that. We just think we've now have beautiful project management instead of what you're using now, which is ugly project management. But at the end of the day, if the ugly thing's doing what it needs to do, it's a hard sell. And that's why, the big thing we're facing now, to be honest, is on the education side, the beautiful thing about these demos has been everyone gets it. All I need to do, the way I pitch it is, sell me your product, right?
Yeah.
And they go into their product or whatever it is they're selling. And I point out how they personalize their pitch to me.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm we do this offline. This is if I go to a design conference and I'm talking to designers, if they ask what I do, I'm going to phrase it differently than if I went to MicroConf. Yeah. Right. So we all do this. So it's an easy pitch, but the hard thing that they don't, and I don't know if, who's the guy at Logicop again? What's his name? Michael. Yeah. I don't know if he's running this kind of, not backlash, but the issue is it's one thing to know that this works. It's another to know, what do I start with? What do I do?
Yeah.
What does that actually mean? So a lot of our onboarding is recipe based. So you log in and it's do you want to get more opt-ins, increase customer evaluation, all these different things.
Yeah.
And then tailor the product based off of, based on what kind, so you're running a SaaS and you want to increase customer LTV. Let's show you how to do that. Right. Yeah. So building that out is the hard part, but it's going to be really once it's live, I think.
Yeah. I think with products like that, the challenge is always people don't have an imagination for what's possible. Or they have an imagination, but they just don't know how to get started. Right. And that's where things like pre-existing templates or being able to fill in something that's already been started for you is way easier than looking at a blank page. And even I think that was the other smart thing you did with those in-person demos is you often would help people get set up initially. And once it's already set up, like it's like, okay, I'm going to personalize this part of your site, and then it's running. Then you've done all the work for them. And I think a lot of SaaS companies could do that. Get people over that. The hardest part is that starting like what, okay, I've got, this is the point I was trying to make with, I wrote something about this where I said, I think installing MailChimp is a lot easier than creating an online course, right? Yeah. Like I just have to put the form on my website and then I'm done and I get to an easy win. Like Rob Walling has this idea of minimal path to awesome. It's like I get the form on my blog and then my aunt signs up and I already feel like I've won, right?
It's like the best is the barometrics, right? You sign up to barometrics and you click one thing and bam, there's value. Mm-hmm. Like that. I mean, that's exactly.
They have a very fast minimal path to awesome. And some products are just are more sophisticated than that. And it's almost like for Mixpanel, for example, they need to set up some stuff for you.
And you need to let it collect.
And you need to collect, right? So, yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about double your freelancing rate. And, we're going to go back in time a little bit. This is, when did you start working on this? When did it launch? Double your freelancing rate.
So a quick backstory. 2011, I was at the peak of running my agency.
Yeah.
We're doing well. We had 11 employees and I was looking at friends of mine online and a lot of them were running software companies. And here I was with a very expensive, a lot of overhead, right?
Yeah.
For this agency, but with like a handful of clients at once. So I wanted to turn the tables and have a lot of people paying me a little. So I launched PlanScope, which was, or is a project management tool for freelancers and agencies.
Yeah.
Which I did the kind of typical I hate all the software available and I'm going to start my own thing, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. And the realization was it's one thing. The easy part was building it, but getting actual people who are the right kind of people in front of it, that was hard.
Yeah.
So I
almost wonder if we need to turn that around. Like everyone's always like, oh, I hate using this software, so I'm going to build my own. But it's almost like you need to say, what software do I love using that I could just take to a different market? Like, like MailChimp, I love sending email newsletters. So I'm going to create ConvertKit, but just for this one group of people.
With a certain niche, yeah.
Yeah, because it almost shows you, like, if everyone's saying, I hate my project management software, that's a shitty market. That just means that everyone's always switching to different project management tools.
Well, what I've realized since is people just generally suck at managing projects. Yeah. Right? And they blame the tool. So, I always say if I could go back in time, I wouldn't start with software. I would have started with a course on how to make badass clients by managing clients correctly or managing projects correctly, and then bring in the tools like the implementation, right?
Yeah.
But the issue was I built this and I launched it, and if they build it, they will not come. If you build it, they will not come. So. I did the typical, I'd grown this agency. I knew a bit about getting clients and pricing and stuff. So on the PlanScope blog was where I started writing articles that were generally just consulting articles with the hope that somebody goes to Google and types in how do I raise my rates? They read an article, call to action is something about PlanScope. They click that and they'd sign up and it didn't work. Right. So I was getting traffic. I was getting people coming, but they weren't converting to PlanScope. So that's when I thought, it kind of makes sense where if I was looking for information on pricing, I'm probably reading that because I'm don't have much money or cash flow issues or something. And there's a disconnect between reading an article about pricing and then project management call to action, right?
Yeah.
So that's when I got into let's do I read an article way back when about, it wasn't even email courses, it was just autoresponders, right?
Yeah.
So I did a very simple 5-day autoresponder on basically exactly that, how to have better clients that culminated with PlanScope.
Yeah.
That started working, but it still wasn't it just wasn't catching on the way I needed it to. So, or that I was hoping. And here I was, I had exited my agency. I was trying to live off of SaaS it wasn't making a ton of money. And that's what led me to think, well, what if, I keep getting questions from people, especially customers of the SaaS, which is weird, about pricing. And that's what led to what was a $29 ebook that I called Double Your Freelancing Rate. And that was 4.5 years ago now. So. Okay.
And so that was 2011 when you launched the book?
2011 is when I launched PlanScope. Okay. But it was like late 2012, 2013, I think, is when I did Double Your Freelancing Rate.
And I kind of want to like paint the picture because this whole series is called Mega Profitable. And I want to paint the picture. The idea is we often talk about revenue, but revenue only tells one part of the story. There's also like, did this actually make profits? And so what did that journey to profitability look like from launching that book and then kind of moving through to what you ended up doing, which sounds like it was like a course and then also kind of like some mentorship and some other things. So what was it profitable right away? And how did you keep growing those profits over time?
But it was profitable in the sense that, so when I had my agency, we did about $2 million a year in revenue, but I brought home less than six figures because we had a very high overhead, right?
Yeah.
Whereas with the ebook, the V1 Double Your Freelancing Rate, circa like 2012.
Yeah.
I mean, outside of my PayPal fees, because I was using what was that crappy ebook selling tool thing back then? It was I don't even remember. It was like their whole backend was a Flash thing. It was like built in Flash. God, it's gonna bug me. eJunkie.
Oh yeah,
something junkie, right?
Yeah, eJunkies. Yeah.
So So they worked with PayPal. They didn't. I mean, Stripe. I don't know if Stripe was. I think Stripe was. No, Stripe was a thing then, but they weren't working with them. So I was using eJunkie to do it, right? So outside of their fees and like the $5 or $10 a month I paid eJunkie, it was profit, right? I mean, if you don't factor in the value of my time and so on, it was pure profit. It was just me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, what happened with that was I pre-sold it because I wanted to go to this conference in Ireland and I didn't have the money, so I basically made a bet saying like, if I can get the money that I haven't budgeted for this, then I'm going to go. So I had a fledgling list around PlanScope and even my articles, and I made, I think it was like 2,500 or so from pre-selling this book. And now I'm like, crap, I got to write a book. Right. So and it was funny, like Nathan and I were both starting our first books at this time. And so we were always talking about like, how do we launch it and all this stuff. So that's where he and I got to know each other well. Yeah. And, so what was funny was I just started writing weekly to these people, because I felt like I had their $29 and they'd get mad if they didn't have a book right away. So I just shared like what I was writing every week. Yeah. And it was kind of good. It was motivating for me and so on. And I spent a few months writing the book, writing these weekly emails also. And then I shipped the book and gave it to them. And I was like, okay, well, I'm done my emailing. Like, don't need to email them anymore, right? Yeah. Hopefully sales will come in and so on. But I decided to keep writing, right? I decided to keep, it was a habit that I did build. And then I remember the first person who was like, hey, because this wasn't related to PlanScope, right? This is related to the book stuff. Yeah. They're like, I forwarded some of these emails to a friend of mine. She's not ready to buy, but can she get these emails? Yeah. And like, I was like, oh, maybe I should go a little beyond this. So So I threw up like a quick opt-in form, and I think I sent it to them like, just send her here. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the big thing was I started writing weekly, which is huge. And then I ended up from there getting people who were like, this is cool. Have you thought about it's one thing you have a little ebook on pricing, but I know you started an agency. Do you have any advice on that? And I was like, oh, it's so tempting to keep I could take what I learned and package it in so many different ways, but it distracts me from PlanScope. And there's always this push pull, right, between the software company and this. Yeah. And at the time, all of my articles were on planscope.io/blog. Yeah. And then I had single page domains for all this other stuff. And then I had BrennanDunn.com, which had my new podcast I had launched. Yeah. And, it was just a mess, right?
Yeah.
So about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, it's always hard. It's like to figure out when this stuff happened. It was a summer, so it must have been 3 years ago. It's summer now. I put it all under wfreelancing.com. And I yanked everything off the blog. I moved all these single page domains. So wfreelancingrate.com became wfreelancing.com/rate. So it wasn't that far off, but it was still, and that's how like DYF came to be. And at first it was more like, and I think a lot of us as creators do this. It was more my own like, well, this worked for me, so I'm going to share what worked, right? That's like V1 product, but there's been 4 iterations of W Freelancing Rate that, this was a book. Now it's more of a full-fledged course, a few $100s. And what's interesting is now it's more research-based where I'm actually tapping into my own audience and like doing surveying and talking to them and stuff, and to really making it so it's not just Brennan's like random anecdotal stuff. It's more the synthesis of me having gotten pretty decent at communication, so teaching, right? Mixed with my own, but also the real world experiences of people, whether they're customers, people on my list, and so on. Yeah. And that's what things have moved me to. And it's been definitely for the better for everyone involved. But yeah, I mean, it was never like planned. It was more like, well, people keep asking about getting clients, and I have a course on pricing, but if you have no one to pitch, like, what's the point? So that led to courses on getting clients and so on. So yeah, that's been the trajectory, really.
You really followed what people were asking you about. That's the big thing. It seemed like you kept iterating on, at first you were just trying to plug everything into PlanScope, but people were like, we don't want that. We want to make more money with our freelancing business. And once you finally figured that out and switched, then it sounds like you were just following their lead. Like they would say, this has been my experience using your stuff. Here's where the gaps are. And you were able to keep iterating that way.
Right. And it made it, not only was I able to do that, fill in all these gaps on like, okay, so I helped them with this. How else could I help them? But it allowed me to not need to focus as much on necessarily getting new customers. Yeah. Right. I could cross-sell and upsell, which has become more automated. It used to be more of like I do like these big launches and stuff. Yeah. But right now it's nice because I get people in the door in one channel, and then it just kind of like they self-select to move around the ecosystem of products. And it's nice because, customer valuation is able to go up pretty high. And I'm able to point people toward like a first product based off behavior and how they come into my audience and so on. Yeah. And it's been a really good. It's been good from the sense of I'm able to step back and think, okay, well, if I can survey people and figure out where they are now and where they want to be, I can guide them down that path because I have different products that help fill in, like you said, these different holes.
Yeah. And at different stages, it sounds like too.
Yeah, exactly. So if somebody, and this is kind of what led to a lot of the personalization stuff I've been doing recently, but if somebody, if I find out if a design blog sent you to my site, I assume you're a web designer, and then you're reading content on proposals. I assume you care about, you're struggling to close proposals. Mm-hmm. So what that allows me to do is the call to action that gets you on my list is centered on how you as a designer can close more proposals. So huge uptake in conversions from that alone. Yeah. But then I'm able to push them towards my product on proposals. Yeah. And that kind of thing where I'm looking at behavior and I'm responding to it has been, that's the thing that for me has been like, that's like what I'm most proud of in terms of, it's really helped move the business forward. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
And so one of the questions I got on Twitter was, cause I said, I'm doing this series on profitable businesses. And he's like, well, what's your, like, is this after generous founder salary and other things? So was there ever a point where you got to, like, I pay myself about $100,000 a year, but I don't have $100,000 left after that. Did you ever get to the point where you had paid yourself and you had a big chunk of profit sitting in your bank account too? And how long did that take to get there? All right, just a quick interruption here. I know you folks want to hear Brennan's answer. How much profit did he end up making on this business? We're going to get to that, but I want to remind you to go to megamaker.co/profit and sign up there just to get the rest of the case studies that are going to be coming out soon. Some of these I'll be releasing as podcasts, but some of these are just interviews, like written interviews I did, and people reveal their numbers. They reveal what took them from just having a business that was paying the bills to a business that was actually earning a significant amount of profit after salary, after disbursements, after paying all their expenses. And if you're at that stage in your business, or if you're thinking about starting a business and you want to know, is this going to be worthwhile, or is this just going to be like having another job? You really need to check this out. So megamaker.co/profit. All right, let's get back to this now.
I think by year, so about 2 years ago, I think I was clearing 300,000, and last year it was a little over $1 million. And granted, expenses on that were about 15%. So let's round up 200,000 expenses. I run a lot through the company. Mm-hmm. I mean, if we want to get really if you're an internal revenue service agent listening, please don't listen anymore. But, leave it at that.
Yeah. but by 2 years ago, you had, if I had $300,000 in profit, and then I decided to do distributions after that, that's still a pretty good nest egg inside of the business. And I think just to give people perspective again, in 2012, Brennan pre-sold the book and made $2,500 in pre-sales.
Yep.
And I just want one thing. I think when you hear big numbers from where people are at now, you sometimes forget where they came from. And I hear people all the time who launch their first thing and make, $100 or $1,000 or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's pretty good. You're in the 1% of people who have ever launched anything online and made any money. And the whole key was Brennan, first of all, he decided to choose the product that was gaining more traction, which a lot of people don't have the good sense to do. And then he iterated on that thing like crazy. And so it sounds like one of the things for you for becoming mega profitable, it was, I need to keep iterating on this. And once you found something that worked, your costs kind of stayed the same. And then everything after that was just profits.
Right. I mean, it became advantageous for me. I mean, it doesn't really generally work for me, at least, to just try to, I mean, I'm liable to do this often, but to jump around, it's better to just say, this is consistently a product that does it very well. It's immediately fulfilled. There's no rev share or anything going on. So it's all pretty much mine, except for what Stripe takes. And focus on, okay, well, how am I getting people to that, through that funnel to get there and buy?
Yeah.
And then how do I amplify that? And that's everything else, the other products are good because that's the first sale, but then I realistically know within 6 months, somebody with a valuation of, let's say, 207, which is the average valuation of somebody within the first month or so who becomes a customer, that spikes up to about 600-700, depending on the segment. If it's an agency, it's in the thousands, but it depends. I'm able to know if I can, which is good, because then if I'm doing and I haven't done this is to the extent that I need to. I'd love to get better at this, but paid acquisition stuff, I can say, if I can realistically get X 207 within the first month, for a new customer, and then break it down. And that, I mean, my lead value through my normal funnel, depending on the type of, so I break it down by industry type.
Yeah.
But developers, let's say, are about $60. So, I get a developer entering their email address in this opt-in form. That's $60 per time for that person, but that's going to be about $20-something within a month, right? So I can make good decisions on that then let me say, well, that's a really high valued audience for me because I do well with them.
Yeah.
So strategically, let's acquire more of them. So what does that mean? Maybe there's paid ways of doing that, which obviously lower profitability there, but also guest post podcasts and so on. And that's been something for me that's been extremely, like, having those metrics and numbers and working with them has been a really good thing.
Yeah, that was kind of my follow-up question is, there's some people that are just starting off and they're like, man, if I could just have revenue, that would be amazing. There's other people
right.
that, maybe they're like me, they're sitting at probably, after I pay myself, I've probably got 5-10% profits in the business. And then there's folks like you that have, you've increased profits quite a bit. But business is hard at each of those stages. So what kind of obstacles have you had along the way that you had to overcome? And maybe, like, what are you struggling with now? What does a more profitable company struggle with at this point?
I guess for me, there's a few different things now. One of which is, it's funny, I was working with a business coach in Atlanta 2 days ago. And he was talking about, like, the kind of natural life cycle of a lot of these companies are super excited at the beginning. And then as you start to grow, again, that excitement is there. And then you get into something called whitewater, where it's just like you're almost not getting burned out, but it's more like you're just getting, especially depending on your personality type, can get a little like, I want to do something new, right? Yeah. Instead of going above that hurdle and like pushing forward.
Yeah.
So, I think on a smaller scale, there's been a lot of that whitewater throughout kind of the creation of this thing. Part of it is just like, you ever look at like a stock chart, right? Like for a stock, right? And you're looking on like the week level and it's like, could be down, right? Like just sucking this week. But then you zoom out and it's just up and to the right, right? And I think a lot of us, we're in that, like, sales have, like, no one's bought this week. So you think, like, you start to question, like, is this, like, dying? Is this blowing? Like, am I done?
Yeah.
Right. And I'm sure we all get, like, these things all the time, right? Like, especially if you do a lot of big launches and then most of your sales come from that. And then the rest is kind of like nothing.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel that.
Yeah.
So, it's that, but it's also the context switching where, I've naturally, especially with W freelancing, I've been reluctant to delegate, probably more out of fear, if you want to psychoanalyze it, fear of, like, can actually people do this without, like, me needing to jump in? Like, would I actually be gaining anything by delegating, this and that out?
Yeah.
But, it's that kind of stuff where I've been, like, continuously thinking, like, okay, I started the day thinking I just need to clear out my week so I can work on this new product or revising this product in that way.
Yeah.
And then, like, the fires come up, right? Where it's like the business is growing. You've got a lot of customers now and it's just like maintenance and admin half the time, right?
Yeah.
So, like, balancing that and learning how to, just kind of, I guess, in a way, guard your time, from, like, because it's very easy for me, at least, to be like, okay, I've just dealt with, like, this not angry, but like a customer who's, like, mad or something, and then it just sets you off. And, like, I've really tried to get myself out of the inbox as much as possible and to have, like, treat it like if it was a SaaS, like, the founder's not going to be there doing frontline support.
Yeah.
Right. So, it's taken time, but it's eventually kind of handing over some of those reins. And I think it's easier now for me because my attention is on right message and I need to intentionally figure out how do I automate this so I'm not a dependency on it, but it's still valuable and still making money.
Yeah.
And, that's kind of where I am now. And it's still a work in progress, to be honest. But,
yeah. I just have a few more things I want to ask. There's actually a lot I wanted to delve into that, but I want to keep this as short as we can. What have you tried on maybe the expense side that ended up being too expensive that you had to pull back on?
Well, I can tell you. So I had a premium course called the W Freelancing Academy.
Okay.
And it cost $9,000 to join, which and it was a 7-month long program.
Sorry,
that was
1,000?
very high. 9,000.
9,000. Okay.
We've had a good amount of people go through it, but caveat being, what profit wise, what DYF makes after, and this doesn't even count. I know like you were separating out what you pay yourself with company profit. I'm talking about what happened like after the bills have been paid.
Yeah.
It was less than 5% revenue, or 5%. So I actually generally made more 5% profit. I generally made more money selling like a single copy of Double Your Freelancing Rate at $300 than a $9,000 transaction.
Yeah.
And, so because we had basically 14 people working on that product.
Yeah.
So we had support people, we had management people, we had the teachers and so on.
Yeah.
And it was, and at that price point, you're not talking about add to cart buttons. You're talking about back and forth email sales discussions, right?
Yeah.
So that sort of thing it's by far the most valuable product we ever offered in terms of customer success.
Yeah.
But from a viability perspective, it was even, if you really think about it, a lot of the people bought over installment and like $750 a month times 12.
Yeah.
And when you really factor in probably dunning and failed cards, we lost money on quite a few students.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that it was more like running an agency.
Yeah.
It sounded great on paper.
Yeah.
Just like a lot of agencies, it sounds great when you say you've got 15 people and you're billing them out at X, but then you really get into it and it's a totally different story.
Yeah.
So that, for me at least, that was the thing that I am excited in the sense that it's been an amazing product.
Yeah.
But when you're selling a $9,000 thing and you're not like a Walmart, and you're only making $300 on it, that is, especially when there's high risk of defaults and such.
Yeah.
Again, it's one of these things where everyone's trying to go, and the advice I got actually, which was interesting, was we tended to have everything high touch. It wasn't like a really expensive $9,000 video course. It was live for 7 months every week for an hour training and teaching. And the feedback we got from some people was, like you're in this dead zone where people will pay $2,000, maybe $3,000 for like a product that has maybe like a few calls or something like that. But for the most part, it's like set in stone. It's a video course.
Yeah.
Like whatever meets things, right? But then there's this $15,000+ range where you have, it's more like coaching, but it's sold as a product, right? And it's scoped. But then there's, no man's land in between. And I put myself there.
Yeah.
And I really understood why it's really hard to do that. So anyway, that was from like an expense perspective. Everything else I kept fairly lean.
Yeah.
I really like the low touch, smaller transaction. By smaller, I mean just, 3-figure-ish, transaction, that is pretty self-managed, where like if somebody writes in with like a 30-paragraph email about, is this right for me? We're not even going to respond.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was quite the experiment that didn't end up panning out.
And this is the kind of evaluation you need to do, really, is at the beginning when you're testing an idea out. It's so easy to say, I'm going to work like 80 hours a week on this. I'm going to, invest whatever it takes to make it work. But at some point you've got to evaluate, like you did, am I making any money on this? And that has to include things like my time, stress level, other people I'm paying, and failed transactions. Is this worth it at the end? And that's why I think profit is such a good bellwether
indicator.
Is that
that's why when companies brag about having 30 employees, I'm like, okay, so you have a crap ton of business expense.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Exactly.
It makes sense oftentimes, but sometimes I don't see that as a bragging right.
Yeah.
It's impressive, but it's not. Yeah.
And this is where I think folks need to put on their critical thinking when they see, for example, let's say $1 million in revenue, which, a lot of people would love to have a business that's making $1 million in revenue. But if they have 12 to 15 people on staff, that number sounds a lot less impressive, doesn't it? Because you know that they have to pay all those people. And really, my buddy Tan at Asian Efficiency, he says, I think he got this from that book Profit First or whatever it's called, but he says 5% profit margins is the new break even. Like if you're at 5%, you're basically at break even, and break even means there are some months where you're going to lose money on the product and some months where you might make enough just to keep the business floating. And I think it's good for us to keep that in mind no matter what we're working on, is at some point to sit down and go, okay, this was a $9,000 product, but if we compare it to this other thing is making us way better money for way less effort.
Exactly. And it might look less. I mean, you get 100 people at 9,000 a piece. That's 900,000, right? Mm-hmm. That looks impressive on paper. But when you really factor that in, that's like 100 times 300, so 30,000 or whatever that might be in profit.
Yeah.
Where, getting like for the effort that went into that, you could have gotten significantly more profit.
Yeah.
By going after, and again, it's not like, I'm not trying to say that's the only, like, don't do big premium, don't do that kind of stuff. It's just for me and the way I wanted the company to run and it just didn't work out well. Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that but it's easy. It's easy to say, oh, I'm going to have this crazy member. And I know you do this too, but like, this membership site thing, and it all sounds great on paper, but then you deal with the commitment of people needing to pay monthly for something, and then like all that, and then how do I deliver ongoing value to them, and like so on. So like for my own purposes, I found that for me, what is best is a thing where you pay this and you get this. You pay this amount and you get this much value.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like it's not, the value isn't unlocked over time or anything like that. But what I'm trying to get at is the model could have worked.
Yeah.
It just, for the way that I wanted the business to run, it didn't.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think, and we can end with this. One of the kind of impactful conversations you and I had at MicroConf was, because you're further ahead than me. I didn't go full time with products until 2016, last year. And one of the things you said, looking at me, you said, Justin, you're working way, way harder than me and making way less money. And it's almost like you were evaluating my profitability. You're like, not just in terms of like, yes, my time is worth something, but also my stress, the amount of things that could go wrong, the amount of buffer I have for things like getting sick or whatever. And
you've got like 1 million kids too, right?
And I've got 4 kids and, all that other stuff. And so I think, do you want to talk a little bit about that just to close? Like, what are some things you think people get wrong around that of, maybe not evaluating how they're investing their time or how they might be able to move to something that's better?
Well, I think you've got, in a way though, what I would say is you and I have very different styles in what we do, right? Yeah. So you're extremely charismatic, whereas I'm not that charismatic, unfortunately. I wish I was. But what I mean is that I think you thrive more than I do on the things like what you were just doing, the live YouTube thing, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the kind of stuff, and that's impressive as hell. But I think what I was getting at was like my big thing, and I've been hell-bent on this for a while, is, I think a lot of us are very much in the weeds of like doing things like I'm gonna do this thing and like work really hard and like promote the hell out of this and do lots of like this and that. And the big realization from, Tim Grohl?
Yeah.
You know him? Have you met him?
Yeah.
So he and I were talking a little before MicroConf, which is probably where that sentiment came from. And he's like, look, I want to have a business that if I got hit by a bus and went into a coma for, a year,
yeah,
there should be minimal impact.
Yeah.
And, so, with that said, it's like, what can we do? It's a bit like, for instance, I give, when working with freelancers, for instance, a lot of them are, the way I describe it, like working in this almost inertia-driven business, right? Where it's, if they had to step away for a while, do they have the right systems in place? I mean, granted, it's much harder when you're selling services because it's really no fulfillment outside of you doing the work. But what I like looking at, and what interests me the most is, maybe this is the lazy developer in me, but I'm looking at like, what can I do to systematize as much as possible stuff, because computers are awesome and can do things without manual input. Yeah. So like in my case, that meant I don't want to be on the hook to write a weekly email in order to get new sales. Yeah. I want to have things that will look at like, what have people read and what haven't they read and what are they focused on, and send them weekly emails entirely automatically. Yeah. Based on the content I write. I mean, if I was doing this from scratch, like with Write Message from scratch, I don't have a stable of content to do that with, right? Yeah. But I'm always looking for like, what can we do to make it so we can focus high level R&D, like really running the company, and even if it's a company of one, versus the like, I need to bang out broadcast emails so I can keep getting sales. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I find fascinating, like that kind of stuff,
Yeah. And I think that's super important. Like at the beginning, you're just hustling so hard, but what
turn that off. Yeah.
What was kind of like helpful for me to hear from you was, Justin, I've been doing this longer, and if you want this to be sustainable, like if you want to last, you need to systemize something. So first of all, that you have more time to think about your business, right? Even if you're a company of one, like you said, the founder's number one job is to just think about the business. Like, what's coming up next? What am I seeing? What research am I getting? What patterns are emerging? And if all I'm doing is in the weeds, like work, it's not going to be sustainable. I'll never grow the business to be actually profitable.
It's a job, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's the switch that I'm now making, is that, okay, I've proven that I can make a living from this, but a business's whole purpose is to make profits. If I'm investing my time in this and more time and money in this than the stock market, I better hope that this is going to give me better returns than the stock market. And that absolutely means 10, 15, 20% profit margins. Right. So yeah, I thought that was an awesome message, and just depending on where people are at, probably exactly what they need to hear.
But you can't start there. I mean, you need to start. I know, we were talking, I never know when you start recording, but when we were talking at the beginning, you were asking me about like the weeks of like craziness I was in with these one-on-one demos. Yeah. Like, I think it would be easy to get addicted to that high and to keep just doing that, to like pound the pavement for MRR. Yeah. But, it had its place, and it's not over yet, but it has its place for the life cycle of the company that I'm, working on now. Yeah. But that's not like going to be my role, hopefully in a few months or and beyond, right? Like it's one of those things where it had to be there, but I know the addiction of being able to do that, getting on a demo, closing somebody and getting them to buy and seeing that new burst, and like, I've got $300 a month in added MRR. That's awesome. Yeah. But, it's just one of those things where we need to start there. We need, when starting a new business, you need to start with the things that don't scale. Yeah. And the things that are maybe to some people, like my personality type, more annoying than other people. Yeah. But it's one of those things where eventually, have you read Anything You Want by Derek Sivers? Yeah. 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 Well, he talks about like and this isn't anything new. I mean, this goes way back to like E-Myth stuff, but like the idea of like a franchisable business, even if you never plan on franchising it. Yeah. It's that same model. Like, like the owner of the Quiznos I don't know if you guys have Quiznos there. We have Quiznos. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, they used to be awesome. Like anyway. Yeah. Tangent. The owner of the Quiznos, he or she is not like winging it every day, right? Like you're following the Quiznos playbook. Yeah. And even if you've got no one else working for you and you don't ever plan on like I don't know how you franchise an online business, but say you did.
Yeah.
Right? Like you should be able to do that. Like it's just better for the business, better for everything. But it's hard to, like, when you make that switch, when you go from the hustle, nonstop, whatever mode to actually stepping back and saying, okay, let's take this now to the next level.
Yeah.
And, it's hard to, and I'm not saying, like, even once you're in that, it's easy to go back and, like, just starting the things that, and it makes sense. Like, there's room for the things that don't scale, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's room for the things that are things you might do early on. Like, one thing, I respect the hell out of Pat Flynn, because even though he's got an amazing business, he still randomly jumps on Skype calls with people who just opted in that day.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, what got you to sign up to my list?
Yeah.
And, like, that's more important early on.
Yeah.
But it's good that that stuff still happens.
Yeah.
You know? So.
Yeah, you still need some of that stuff that doesn't scale to stay kind of current. But I think the time where you switch to scaling mode is when you've built a few things, you've had multiple launches, maybe for multiple launches for the same product. And then you can say, okay, I've done this now 2 or 3 times. What can I just automate and not have to think about anymore? And I'm still doing manual launches, but one thing I've noticed is that I just keep going and back and copying the same emails and, like, modifying them a little bit. So that could probably be automated now. And I have noticed that each launch gets easier and I have more time. And so, I just finished a launch for marketing for developers and now I've got time. I'm kind of like, okay, what do I do next? I don't know. This is a good time to think about how I might automate and scale the next launch.
Right. Yeah. And that's the beauty of it, right? Like you've done this enough times that then you can convert that. I like to think of it like, and this is something I've been really harping on a lot recently, is this idea of, like, when I do a new product now, I sell it conversationally, where it'll be like PS in the end of a newsletter where it's like, hey, I'm thinking of doing this. If you're interested and want to hear a bit more, like, respond.
Yeah.
And then I try to sell everyone over email, maybe over the phone, but usually just over email. Give them the buy link when they're ready. Do that a bunch. Collect that dialogue that can then be normalized into a monologue. Yeah. And then, do the monologue in a way like you were saying, where you're doing these big launches. But then over time you can start seeing, oh, wait, like if I'm, like the guy who joined yesterday versus the person who joined like 3 months ago, they're not both ready for a launch in the same way. Yeah. Right. So, like, what can you do then to say, okay, well, how can I make this more of a life cycle launch rather than a on Justin's timetable launch, right? Yeah. But by doing it more conversationally and then doing it this way and then, putting into place automation, that's the thing that to me is like the ideal path. Yeah. For this kind of stuff.
Totally. Brennan, this was awesome, man. I really appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin.
Okay. Thanks. So that's it for the first mega profitable episode. Again, I'm going to be publishing more interviews here on the Product People feed. But if you want to get all of these case studies with detailed answers to, what makes a product profitable, how can you make your products more profitable, you really need to go to megamaker.co/profit. Sign up on that list and you will get all of the future case studies. If you're already on my newsletter, you'll already get them. But if you're not, megamaker.co/profit. Also, please go on Twitter, thank @Brennan Dunn. Go and check out his new project, writemessage.com. Also, go and check out doubleyourfreelancing.com. Especially if you're a freelancer, it's got tons and tons of great stuff for you. I'm Justin Jackson. You can follow me on Twitter, the letter M, the letter I. Justin, if you're still listening, could you just hit me on Twitter and say, hey, I heard the episode, and tell me what you thought? That'd be awesome. Also, because this show hasn't been as updated as much, if you could go to iTunes and leave a review, that would be amazing. All right, folks, talk to you later. podcast hosting is provided by Transistor.fm. They host our MP3 files, generate our RSS feed, provide us with analytics, and help us distribute the show to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. If you want to start your own podcast or you want to switch to Transistor, go to transistor.fm/Justin and get 15% off your first year.